Welcome back to our series, How to Pray. My name is Professor Avraham Apatow. Today we're going to speak about the idea of the chosen people. This came up at the end of our last discussion because we were in the topic of the Shema, and we saw that the final blessing before the recitation of the Shema, the declaration of faith, was this beautiful statement and beautiful prayers about the close connection and love between God and the people of Israel, and that we blessed God for choosing us. Now, I think the key point to remember is God chose the Jewish people to be a nation of priests, not to be just one people among the world that gets to be close to the Creator and then forget about the whole world. The point is that Jewish people are chosen as a priestly nation within the families of all the nations of the world. But what does this mean? How does this really relate? How does a chosen people relate to the rest of the world? And I think one of the greatest answers I've heard was by Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach of blessed memory. And Shlomo Carlebach, he says that what does it mean to be chosen? It means to teach the whole world that they are chosen. In other words, just as the Jewish people have a purpose, a destiny, a mission, a place in God's plan for the entire world, so does every people in the world, and also every individual. And so the point of having a book and a story documenting this relationship that God chose Abraham and his descendants for this special purpose, it's a message not only for the Jewish people, it's a message for the entire world that there exists something in the structure of creation called being chosen. And it's not exclusive. It doesn't mean that only the Jewish people are chosen for a purpose. It means that if the Jewish people are chosen for a purpose, it means that God chose everyone for a purpose. And I would like to share a very interesting story that helps us understand this teaching. I would like to share a story with you that illuminates this teaching, a very interesting story. It happened several years ago. I had a friend who took a journey to Israel. At the time, I was living in California. And my friend took a spiritual journey to Israel, and he visited the Western Wall, the Kotel. And he said when he put his head to the wall, began to pray, after finally returning to Israel and to the Kotel after many, many years, he said at that moment he had a vision of himself back in sunny California. And he said it wasn't just like a vision, it just wasn't like imagination. He truly felt like he was sitting in his backyard in California. And he looked at me in absolute astonishment. How is that possible? How is it possible that I go from a place of what we call exile, living outside of the Holy Land of Israel? I make the journey to Israel, into its holiest place, and at that place of the greatest holiness, what happens? I'm thrust back into my starting point of my whole journey, where I was outside of holiness, outside the Holy Land, in my regular mundane life. And if I may, let's try to answer this question with another story. There was once a man living in Europe, supposedly a true story. He had a dream that a treasure was buried under a bridge in the main city of his country. So he took a journey to that city, and he went to that bridge. But he saw there were a lot of guards there, so there wasn't really an opportunity for him to dig. So, he took a chance. He went up to one of the guards and said, I had this interesting dream. I dreamt there was a treasure of gold sitting under this bridge. And if you let me dig here, maybe we could dig together and we'll share the treasure. And the guard looked at him and said, "Oh, you crazy Jew. Let me tell you my dream. I dreamt that there was this Jew, and he lived in this little village, in this little town, and under that guy's stove was buried also a treasure of gold. Now, our original friend on the journey, he recognized that the very village and house he was describing was his own house. So he went home, and what did he do? To the dismay of his wife, he started digging under his stove, and there he found a treasure. Supposedly a true story, and supposedly there's a synagogue built by this person in Europe, and I've had friends who visited there. But the message of the dream is he had to go on the journey to discover that that treasure was sitting under his house. In the same way, my friend, he was going to search for holiness in a special land, in a special place. And when he arrived at that place, God was showing him that the holiness that he's seeking exists in his very life, where he is, his ordinary life. Now, this is not to say, God forbid, that Jewish people shouldn't come and move to Israel and live in the Holy Land, because I believe they should. But I think in this person's specific situation, he was a religious Jew living in a city where there were, I believe he was one of very few religious Jews, and one of the only people who actually really looked like a religious Jew. And he was a teacher, and he was inspiring his students and his neighbors and friends and people around in his community to learn more Torah, to come closer to God, and to discover Judaism. So he was living a very holy, very godly life. And clearly God gave him this experience to show him how special and important his life was, where he was living in his regular life, and that God was with him. So we can ask ourselves, why does a person have to travel to a holy land? Travel to speak to holy people? Well, this is the message of the story of the person with the dream. If he hadn't gone to the bridge in the capital city, I think in Prague, he would never have learned that that treasure was really in his own home. Well, in the same way, a person travels to a holy place and to holy people to discover that's the treasure that's within their own lives, within their own souls. So yes, you have to travel outside of yourself. You have to come closer to holiness, come closer to God. But ultimately it's a circle, because the true discovery is discovering that godliness and that wisdom within your own life, within your very soul. So if the Jewish people are to be chosen, if they're supposed to be holy people, priestly people, godly people, the message that they have to share for the whole world is that God is present within all of life, within all peoples, within all individuals, and that our challenge is ultimately to find it, to seek it out, and God willing for it to be revealed, and that would be the highest ideal of the chosen people, is to find the greatest ways and means to reveal godliness in the world for all of humanity to see not only how God is present in a holy land, but also to see how God is present in every land and in every place. And so if that's what it takes for one person to be chosen by God and his descendants, and to have a special book, a special story that shows how this one people has been preserved through history, not the greatest of nations, but the smallest of nations, a nation facing the greatest challenges and oppositions, but somehow, miraculously, not through their own strength and ingenuity, but really through their faith, has been able to survive and overcome impossible odds to be reborn in our modern world. And that's a message for all humanity, that there is God, there's providence, there's a purpose, and that despite all the challenges that humanity faces, the challenges of war, of all the violence, of all the tremendous weapons, of the technology, of all the environmental problems, of all the disease in the world, all these problems that we're completely surrounded by, that we can survive, and that we can not only survive, but we can be blessed. And that's the message of Israel, that even though it's surrounded by enemies, even though it's a small nation, even though it didn't have power, it didn't even have guns, it was able to overcome, and it's in the process of its fulfilling its destiny. And so this is what Shlomo Carback is saying, that all the people can discover how they're chosen, that they can be lifted up, they can overcome all their challenges and find their purpose, their meaning, their destiny in this world, and be blessed by connecting to the children of Avraham. Because this blessing is to realize that there is blessing, that there is chosenness. And that is this beautiful teaching by Rabbi Shlomo Carback. The Jewish people are blessing their chosenness because it reveals that God is in the world.